welcome back to my channel. My name is Dory. Here we like to talk about the dark and unexplainable. For tonight's episode of the Gory Dory Story, we're going to pop right on over to the quiet countryside of Newark, Delaware, a place where history and legends actually blur together. So, in the rolling countryside of Newark, Delaware, sits a small, unassuming crossing bridge. At first glance, it looks pretty ordinary. It looks like just another landmark for the Revolutionary War. But those who live by know better. They whisper that once the sun dipped below the trees, the battlefield awakened. And on certain night, if the air is heavy enough and the mist rolls across the water just low enough, a rider emerges. A rider who should have been long dead. This is the Specter of Cooch's Bridge. To better understand why this specter still refuses to rest, we have to go back to the very beginning in September of 1777, when the Revolutionary War first thundered across Delaware. There was a boy named Charlie Miller. Wasn't a name history remembered, but the valley around Cooch's Bridge did. Charlie Miller wasn't born into greatness. He was just a poor farm boy, the son of a miller who scraped by grinding grain for the neighbors in the Delaware countryside. His family's world was small. Fields, a creek, the faint squeals of the old mill wheel, and Sunday hymns in the village church. But Charlie always wanted more. At night, he would sit by the fire, listening to travelers talk about battles, freedom, and a new nation being born. To Charlie, the war wasn't just politics, it was a chance to prove himself, to step out of the shadows of his father's farm, to be remembered for something greater than carrying sacks of grain. So when the Revolutionary War came rumbling to Delaware in the autumn of 1777, Charlie didn't hesitate. Barely 19, he kissed his mother's cheek, promised his younger sister he'd be back before harvest, and took his father's old saddle. He had no wealth, no title, no fine weapon, just courage and a borrowed musket. To Charlie, this was the beginning of his story, but to history, it was the beginning of his end. Charlie rode hard to join the colonial militia, his heart pounding with pride and fear. When he reached the encampment near Cooch's Bridge, he was just one boy among dozens of farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers who had traded tools for muskets. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat, men sharpening bayonets and praying in hushed tones as rumors of advancing British forces rippled through the camp. When Charlie gave his name, he was assigned a position, not to the rifle line where he had pictured himself standing shoulder to shoulder with his neighbors, but to the cannon crew. It was dangerous, dirty work, rolling these iron monsters into place, making precise aim, and firing just at the right moment, all while avoiding being hit or shot. Charlie had never fired a cannon in his life. He barely knew how to hold the ramrod, but he had to swallow his fear. This was his chance to prove himself, to his family, to his country, maybe even to history. And so, without question, he stepped into the crew. As the officers barked orders and the heavy wheels creaked across the ground, Charlie steadied himself. He didn't know much about cannons, but he knew one thing: he would not disappoint. The morning air was heavy with fog when the first red coats were spotted moving across the field. The British and Hessian troops had arrived earlier than anyone expected. Shout tore through the colonial camp, and suddenly everything was chaos. Men scrambled into position, muskets loaded with shaking hands, drums pounding over the roar of shouted orders. And then it happened. The first shot rang out from Cooch's Bridge. The battle exploded like a storm. Smoke rolled across the ground. Men fired blindly through the haze, and the screams of the wounded filled the air. Friends became bodies at Charlie's feet in seconds. Charlie, terrified and fumbling, took his place at the cannon. His heart pounded in his chest as he lit the fuse, aiming straight for the British general, riding at the far edge of the field. The fuse hissed, sparks spitting, then silence. A dud? Confused, Charlie had quickly rushed around to check why the cannon hadn't gone off. His hands scrambled over the hot metal, sweat dripping into the barrel of the cannon, his voice shaking as he muttered prayers under his breath. But Charlie didn't know the one thing every experienced gunner understood. Cannons don't always fire instantly. Sometimes the fuse burns just long enough to lure you close, and then the cannon erupted in a blast of fire and iron. The shot ripped free, but Charlie was too close. In the smoke and thunder, his head was gone, snatched away in an instant, his body collapsing to the mud. Soldiers saw it roll across the ground, vanishing into the churn of battle. Charlie Miller never made it home. His body was buried hastily with the other fallen, his name forgotten in the dirt. But what's worse than his unmarked burial was that his head was never found. Charlie's soul could not rest, not without being whole. His ghost still rides, searching endlessly for the piece of himself torn away in fire and thunder. This is why his spirit roams the fields near Cooch's bridge, endlessly searching, not because the head itself holds power, but because without it, Charlie Miller is trapped between life and death, a rider without a face, condemned to wander until he is whole again. They say his ghost rides still, not just to reclaim what was taken, but because a spirit without a head is a spirit without identity. Charlie is trapped, faceless, nameless, forever, searching for something to make him whole again. But here's the part the old folks whisper when the fire burns low. It's not only his head he's looking for. They say he hunts for any head he can take, a replacement, a prize, a way to end his endless wandering. He waits patiently for the poor fool foolish enough to chase the Headless Horseman into the mist, and those who do, they vanish without a trace, as if Charlie finally found himself a new head. But the legend says he always returned, unsatisfied, restless, the echo of hooves fading into silence, which means the heads he takes never last. So now he waits again, roaming the field under moonlight, silent, patient, watching from the fog with a hollow stare. And when the next poor soul draws too close, Charlie rides, not for justice, not for peace, but for the perfect head to call his own. Over the centuries, the legend grew. Families warned their shut children not to linger at the bridge after dark. Locals would warn that if you do see the Headless Horseman, there is only one way to keep the horseman at bay. If you find yourself near Cooch's bridge on a foggy night and hear the distant thunder of hooves, you must leave an offering, something small but heartfelt, a token to show the rider you sympathize with his pain, that you understand the weight of a soul torn apart. But if you don't, if you turn your back without leaving a gift, then pray you never cross that bridge again, because the horseman remembers, the horseman waits, the horseman fury builds with every passerby who dares show no respect. And when you do return, whether it's in a day, a month, or a year, he will be there in the mist, waiting to close his grip around you. One night, not long ago, a young man stumbled out of a tavern near Cooch's bridge, drunk on ale and louder than the crickets. The locals had warned him before he left. If you see the horseman, leave him an offering, show respect, or risk his wrath. But the boy only laughed, waving them off. A ghost looking for his head? He scoffed. If he wants one, he can try and take mine. That night, he staggered toward the bridge, his voice carrying through the mist. They say he shouted into the darkness, daring the headless rider to appear. No offering, no token of sympathy, only mockery. The next morning, the tavern keeper found the boy's car still in the parking lot of the bar, key left inside and doors unlocked. No signs of S struggle or the drunk man. They searched the fields and the woods until sundown, until they finally what appeared to be a body floating in nearby creek. So they searched the body for any clues who this person could have been. They finally found something in that would give them a clue who this victim is. And in the back pocket was a brown leather wallet containing debit cards and of course a state ID. Turns out the wallet belonged to the drunk man that mocked the very horseman the night before. On moonlit nights, you can still hear the horseman's muffled laughter echoing faintly near the bridge, cut short by the thunder of hooves. And the locals say this: it wasn't the drunkard's head Charlie Miller wanted. It was his defiance, his arrogance. Now the specter waits still, patient as ever, searching the fog for the next fool who dares to cross without respect. A rider with no face, no voice, no peace, bound to gallop endlessly, reminding Delaware that some wounds never heal and some battles never end. So Delaware's most famous tourist attraction isn't the beach, isn't the tax-free shopping, or even Joe Biden's favorite ice cream shop. No, it's a faceless, headless, possibly homicidal ghost, because, well, why not? Honestly, if I saw a ghost rider charging at me on a foggy bridge, I wouldn't stick around to figure out if it's real or just cosplaying. I'd be gone so fast. And let's be real, if you saw the Specter of Cooch's brig, and your first instinct is to follow it, congratulations! You now unlock Darwin's Award Ghost Edition. The locals have been saying the same thing for centuries. Don't chase the spooky faceless horseman. He's not your Uber driver, he's not your friend. He doesn't have your DoorDash order either. Why? And if you chase him, he's only going to assume that you're his DoorDash order. Alright? So that's tonight's Gory Stories. Follow for more chilling, haunting legends. And tell me down in the comment section, which place should we haunt next? My name is Dory, and I'll see you in the next one. Toodaloo!